On July 22nd, 1988, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper died after going over the terrace of his mother's 14th floor Manhattan apartment, while Gloria Vanderbilt stood close enough to reach and not close enough to save him. He was 23. He had graduated from Princeton. He was the son of a woman who had once been worth millions before she could even speak her own name. That was the cruelty of Gloria Vanderbilt's life. A child trust worth several $1 million had made her famous in 1934. A line of women's jeans, launched with her signature and a swan, made hundreds of millions in sales by the early 1980s. And yet the hardest moment of her 95 years was measured not in money, but in 14 stories of air. Everyone knew the name Vanderbilt, Cornelius, railroads, mansions, inheritance, the old American scepter passed down through marble halls. Everyone knew the little girl called the poor little rich girl, and later the elegant woman in advertisements, selling denim with aristocratic calm. By the time she died in New York in 2019 at 95, the public record had almost a century of her. Custody papers, wedding notices, fashion campaigns, lawsuits, memoirs, gallery notices, television interviews, and a son on television. But beneath the custody trial, the 4 marriages, the swan logo, the memoirs, and the famous son named Anderson Cooper, there was a simpler story and a sadder one. This is the story of a girl born into fortune, made into property, and forced again and again to prove that she was more than the money attached to her. Gloria Laura Vanderbilt was born on February 20th, 1924, in New York City, into a family that Americans had learned to treat as a kind of native royalty. Her father was Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, an heir from the railroad line of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Her mother was Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, young, beautiful, European in manner, and still barely old enough to understand the house into which she had married. Reginald was a man of horses, gambling, clubs, and drink. The Vanderbilt fortune still sounded immense in 1924. But by then it had been divided among generations of heirs, each one taking something from the pile and putting very little back. Reginald had inherited millions and spent with the confidence of a man who believed money was a weather system, always returning. It did not return. Gloria Morgan had married him in 1923. She was described as a beauty from a diplomatic family, raised between Europe and New York, fluent in the manners of the drawing room and unprepared for the harsher arithmetic of Vanderbilt life. Reginald was much older than she was. His daughter from an earlier marriage, Kathleen, disapproved of the match. Gloria Morgan's identical twin sister, Thelma, moved through the same transatlantic social world and would later be connected to the Prince of Wales. The great name was present, but already there was division in the house. On September 4th, 1925, Reginald Vanderbilt died of an alcohol-related illness when Gloria was about 18 months old. He was 45. The child had no memory of him. What she had instead was a trust of several $1 million, a fortune that gilded her name for the rest of her life and threw a long shadow across every kind of love that came near her at a time when such a sum lay beyond ordinary imagination. The money belonged to Gloria, not to her mother. Banks, lawyers, and trustees controlled it. Gloria Morgan could draw an allowance for the child's care, but the arrangement made the daughter the purse and the mother the petitioner. It was a dreadful beginning for love. The infant became, before she knew language, a financial arrangement watched by adults with ledgers. Soon, Gloria Morgan left New York with her daughter. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, mother and child moved through Paris, London, Switzerland, and the French Riviera, living in hotels, rented places, and the bright rooms of European society. The dollar stretched further abroad. The gossip was looser there. Gloria Morgan moved among aristocrats, artists, dinners, fittings, and late nights, while trustees in America questioned hotel bills, servants, clothes, and travel. The little girl's true household was smaller. Her nurse was Emma Sullivan Kieslich, known as Dodo, a German-born caregiver who became the emotional center of Gloria's childhood. Dodo dressed her, watched over her, comforted her at night, and gave the child the daily presents that her mother, moving through adult parties and travel, did not give. She was said to have slept in the same room, guarded schedules, and made herself indispensable. In later memory, Dodo was not merely a nurse. She was the person who stayed. Back in New York, Reginald's sister Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney began to hear reports about the child. Gertrude was a sculptor, a patron, a formidable woman, and the founder of what became the Whitney Museum of American Art. Married into the Whitney fortune, as well as born into Vanderbilt power, she had money of her own and the authority to act. At Old Westbury on Long Island, she had an estate with rooms, rules, horses, servants, and the heavy discipline of old money. She looked at Gloria Morgan's life in Europe and saw neglect, expense, and danger to the Vanderbilt name. By 1934, after years of expense, suspicion, and bitterness, the matter had hardened into war. Gloria had been living between her mother's world and the Whitney world, sometimes sent to Long Island during illness, travel, or family strain. Gertrude wanted the child raised under Vanderbilt supervision. Gloria Morgan wanted her daughter back, and with her, the maternal authority that also meant access to money for Gloria's care. The girl at the center was 10 years old. She was already known to be delicate, nervous, and deeply attached to Dodo. She loved to draw. She had been carried from country to country, with a surname heavy enough to summon lawyers. She did not yet know that the crown can be placed on a child's head, long before the child has the strength to bear its weight. Then the courtroom doors opened. In 1934, the fight between Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt and Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney became one of the most watched custody cases in America. The United States was still deep in the Great Depression, with hunger, unemployment, and dust storms pressing on ordinary families. Against that hardship, two wealthy women fought in Manhattan over a 10-year-old girl and the trust attached to her. It was a story the newspapers could not resist. The accusations were severe. Gloria Morgan was painted as an absent mother who left her daughter with servants, spent too freely, traveled too much, and exposed the child to unsuitable adult company. There were whispers about Lady Milford Haven, about late nights, about European hotels, about a life considered too loose for a Vanderbilt heiress. Gertrude's side argued for order. Gloria Morgan's side argued that an aunt was trying to take a child who was not hers. Justice John Francis Carew presided. Reporters waited outside. The name Vanderbilt did the rest. The trial was soon treated as the great spectacle of its season, and Gloria was given the label that would follow her for decades. Poor little rich girl. It was cruel because it was neat. It made poverty of affection sound almost pretty when set beside money. On October 21st, 1934, the child was brought into the legal drama herself. She was questioned about her mother, her aunt, her daily life, and where she wanted to live. She was 10. Her feet would not have known the floor of adult power. She said she did not want to live with her mother. She said she wanted to stay with Aunt Gertrude. Whatever pressures had led to that answer, the effect was devastating. Gloria Morgan lost not only a legal argument, but the public image of motherhood. A child had spoken, and the newspapers had their sentence. In November 1934, the judge ruled for Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Gloria would remain with her aunt at Old Westbury. Her mother would have limited visits. The trust remained under the eyes of trustees. The victory did not make childhood tender. Old Westbury was grand, ordered, and lonely. Gertrude was not described as a warm substitute mother. She had her sculpture, her museum work, her own grown children, and a belief in discipline. Gloria had rooms, clothes, tutors, schools, and security. After the Lindbergh kidnapping in 1932, fear of abduction hung over wealthy children, and armed protection could make privilege feel very like imprisonment. The deepest wound was the instability of attachment. Dodo, the nurse who had been Gloria's main comfort, became entangled in the case and its aftermath. She had testified in ways that harmed Gloria Morgan, and at points her place in Gloria's life was broken or threatened. The mother's visits became formal and painful. Gifts arrived: dolls, dresses, books, little luxuries. The child answered politely and returned to the routine. Whether she stayed close a while longer or was taken from the child within the year, the lesson settled early all the same. The person who loved you could be removed by an adult signature. Gloria was educated at elite schools, including Greenvale School, Miss Porter's School, and the Wheeler School, and later studied art in New York. By her teens, she had learned the uses of silence. Other children knew about the trial because their parents had read it over breakfast. They knew she had millions. They knew she had chosen her aunt. Gloria learned that a famous name could make a room turn toward you without bringing anyone closer. At about 15, she began modeling and appeared in Harper's Bazaar around that age, and she ventured toward stage work as well. She was beautiful, titled by newspapers long before she could title herself, and already searching for a doorway out of the role assigned to her. Art became one doorway. Her drawings and paintings gave her a language that did not ask her to choose between adults in public. Hollywood became another doorway. Los Angeles offered parties, studios, palm trees, and famous men, including names such as Errol Flynn and Howard Hughes, moving at the edges of her youthful social life. At 17, another doorway appeared. In Hollywood and New York society, she met Pasquale Pat DiCicco, a Hollywood agent with charm, polish, and a dangerous reputation. He was older, connected to the film world, and able to make escape sound immediate. Gloria had lived under trustees, aunts, lawyers, guards, and headlines. Marriage looked, to a lonely girl, like a key. On December 28, 1941, she married DiCicco in Beverly Hills. She thought she had left the courtroom behind. She had only changed the walls. Pat DiCicco did not give Gloria Vanderbilt freedom. The marriage, begun when she was still 17, became another regime of control. Later, Gloria described it as abusive, marked by physical cruelty and humiliation. In the 1940s, many women carried such injuries behind closed doors, and society often called endurance a virtue when it meant fear. Gloria endured for nearly 4 years. She had left Old Westbury to become her own person and found herself reading a husband's moods, guarding her words, and shrinking inside rooms where she had expected to breathe. The newspapers that had pitied her as a child did not sit beside her in that marriage. We have all known someone like this, fellow travelers. Someone who mistakes rescue for love, because rescue is the only tenderness ever offered. In 1945, she divorced DiCicco on grounds of cruelty. She was 21, legally free, and in control of herself in a way she had never been as a child. That same year, she married Leopold Stokowski, the celebrated conductor associated with the Philadelphia Orchestra and known to American audiences through Disney's Fantasia. He was in his 60s. She was young enough to be his daughter. The marriage astonished the press, which preferred easy labels to complicated need. With Stokowski, Gloria entered a different theatre. There were concerts, rehearsals, musicians, discipline, and culture. The violence of the first marriage was gone, and in its place came grandeur, intellect, and a man accustomed to command. He could summon an orchestra with a movement of the hand. In the home, too, his life set the tempo. Their sons were born in 1950 and 1952. Leopold Stanislaus, known as Stan, and Christopher. In 1952, Gloria also had her first art show. That fact mattered. She was no longer only a wife watching a man's back from the front row. She was beginning, however quietly, to put her own work into the world. And yet the marriage left her lonely. Stokowski's career dominated the house, and Gloria's ambitions could be treated as decorative, charming secondary. She painted, she studied, she wanted something of her own. By 1955, the marriage had ended. She was 31, twice divorced, with 2 sons and a public reputation that still dragged the phrase "poor little rich girl" after her like a chain. In 1956, on August 28th, she married Sidney Lumet, a young director whose life belonged to theatre, television, politics, and film. He would soon become famous for 12 Angry Men. Through Lumet, Gloria moved among actors, writers, directors, committees, gallery openings, and New York arguments that lasted until the plates were cleared. She studied acting, appeared in television dramas, wrote poetry, and took her art more seriously. In those years, she also sought healing in unconventional ways, including LSD-assisted therapy, and attempted a difficult reunion with her mother, Gloria Morgan, whose illness and distance left old questions largely unanswered. The Lumet years placed her near people who cared about ideas rather than merely inheritance. She wanted to be accepted there not as an heiress with a pastime, but as a woman of imagination. She hired help to shape her image. She attended benefits. She moved in circles that included Truman Capote and the society women he called swans, Babe Paley, Slim Keith, CZ Guest, and others. These names mattered in New York. They were the dinner tables where reputation was minted or refused. Yet even among the clever and the beautiful, old wounds remained. Some doors opened for Gloria because her name glittered. Others remained shut because scandal had touched that name when she was 10. During this period, she also severed painfully the bond with Dodo after hearing remarks she could not excuse in a household tied to Lumet, who was Jewish. The nurse who had once been refuge became another lost figure in an already crowded chamber of losses. The marriage to Lumet ended in 1963 after 7 years and no children. It had sharpened her artistic self, but it had not given her a home. Somewhere in these restless adult years came a brief romance with Frank Sinatra, another famous man in a life already crowded with famous men. By then, Gloria had been the child in the trial, the abused young wife, the conductor's muse, and the director's companion. Each role had seemed, at first, to offer a life. Then, on December 24, 1963, she married Wyatt Emery Cooper, a writer and actor from Mississippi. For once, the door opened inward. Wyatt Cooper was not a Vanderbilt, a maestro, a Hollywood operator, or a director whose films swallowed the room. He was steady, thoughtful, southern, and attentive in a way Gloria had not been trained to expect. He had worked as a writer, actor, screenwriter, and editor. He understood words, and he understood listening. Their marriage, her fourth and his first, became the deepest and most stable partnership of her life. In 1965, she gave birth to Carter Vanderbilt Cooper. On June 3, 1967, she gave birth to Anderson Hayes Cooper. Wyatt became the kind of father Gloria had never known: present, practical, affectionate, and involved. He changed the atmosphere of the household. He made family feel less like a legal structure and more like daily bread. While pregnant with Anderson, Gloria moved through Truman Capote's famous black and white ball, carrying both the old society glitter and a private hope that this time her own family might hold. Gloria's homes in those years were vivid with color, art, fabric, quilts, painted surfaces, and the decorative courage that later became part of her public identity. She painted, made collages, designed textiles, and turned rooms into living compositions. Friends saw Wyatt as her anchor through these domestic experiments. After so many cold rooms, the person who steadied the woman behind the rooms. Her work was not a society lady's idle accomplishment. It was how she arranged the world so that loneliness did not have the last word. Her creative life entered commerce before the jeans did. She licensed artwork for scarves, linens, and paper goods. She became known for paintings, collages, home design, and a rich decorative style. Johnny Carson used her artwork for The Tonight Show set, seen on national television in America. Her paintings were not quiet beige things for polite walls. They were full of figures, color, pattern, private symbols, and the stubborn theatricality that had followed her since childhood. The little girl, who had once been managed by trustees, had begun to manage the Vanderbilt name herself. In 1976, Gloria partnered with Mohan Mojani and the Mojani Corporation on a line of women's designer jeans. The idea was daring and perfectly timed. Denim had belonged to work, rebellion, youth, and masculine utility. Gloria's jeans offered a different promise, a high-waisted, slim, feminine garment carrying her signature on the back pocket and a swan logo near the front. The old name met the new body. Women who could not enter a Vanderbilt drawing room could buy a pair of Vanderbilt jeans in a department store. The campaign used Gloria herself, elegant and composed, not as a remote heiress, but as a woman presenting taste as something wearable. Critics mocked the sight of an old-money heiress selling denim and perfume, but the customers were not interested in the mockery. By 1980, the line was generating vast annual sales, reported in the hundreds of millions, and Gloria was earning more from her own name than inheritance had ever truly given her. The name that had trapped her as a child had turned at last to gold she minted with her own hand. It was a remarkable reversal. The trust that had made her a contested child had once reduced her to an asset. The jeans made the name an instrument in her own hand. Perfume, clothing, accessories, and home goods followed. She became one of the early celebrity brands, long before that phrase became ordinary. More importantly, she could tell herself that this money was not merely handed down by Reginald, guarded by banks, or released by trustees. It had come from work, instinct, taste, and risk, and yet the bright years had a crack running through them. On January 5th, 1978, Wyatt Cooper died during open-heart surgery in New York. He was 50, Carter was 12, Anderson 10. The operation had been expected to save him, or at least to lead them onward. Instead, the doctor's words made Gloria a widow after 15 years of the one marriage she would remember as shelter. That was the moment the scepter slipped. Not in a courtroom, not under a headline, not in a business negotiation, but in a hospital, when the one man who had given her a peaceful family did not come home. The hardest blow was still 10 years away, but the shelter that might have braced her for it was already gone. The denim empire kept rising. The house had already lost its center. After Wyatt's death, Gloria Vanderbilt did what she had always done when life broke the surface beneath her. She moved, she worked, she mothered, she painted. She went back into the obligations of business and publicity because 2 sons still needed a living mother, and because stillness had never been safe for her. The jeans became a mass-market phenomenon in the late 1970s and 1980s. Her name appeared on clothing, perfume, home goods, accessories, and advertisements. In 1980, her fashion venture brought her earnings that were reported around $10 million for that year alone. The woman who had inherited money as a child had made money as an adult, and there was a different dignity in that. Inherited wealth had been administered. Earned wealth felt real. Yet money could not repair Wyatt's absence from Carter and Anderson. Carter, sensitive and bright, carried his father's death deeply. He graduated from Princeton, wrote reviews, and seemed to outsiders to have every advantage a young man could possess. Those inside the family saw more fragility. He struggled with sleeplessness and emotional distress. By the summer of 1988, he had been seeing a therapist, had recently suffered personal strain, and had been taking medication for asthma that Gloria later wondered might have contributed to a mental break. On the night of July 21, 1988, Carter came to his mother's Manhattan apartment, agitated and exhausted. Gloria tried to comfort him. She gave him the shelter any mother would give a frightened son: food, a bed, the promise that he could stay, the belief that sleep might bring him back to himself. The next morning, July 22nd, he moved toward the terrace. He was 23. She followed him. 14 stories below lay the city that had watched her since childhood. Gloria pleaded with him, reached toward him, and could not hold him. Carter went over the edge while his mother watched. The public machinery started almost at once. Police, telephones, reporters, headlines. The old machinery from 1934 had found her again. Private agony became public material because her name made grief saleable once again in New York. Anderson was in Washington, D.C., and came to New York into a life divided forever by one telephone call. For weeks, Gloria scarcely left the apartment. The terrace remained there. Carter's room remained there. The mind of a survivor is a merciless clerk, entering every possible alternative into the book. A faster step, a different word, a warning recognized sooner. It is the part of these stories we want least to hear, because no fortune can purchase the sentence every grieving parent begs for. This was not yours to prevent. Gloria began to make art from the wreckage. She created intense assemblages and dream boxes, using fragments, small objects, and enclosed spaces to give grief a shape she could bear to look at. She wrote, too. In 1996, she published A Mother's Story, a memoir centered on Carter's death and the long aftermath of losing a child. She refused to seal his name in silence. She believed speaking of him kept him present. Her bond with Anderson deepened. He had been 21 when Carter died, and his grief sent him outward into dangerous places. He became a journalist, traveling to war zones, disasters, famine, and violence, drawn to places where the inner world had an outer landscape. Gloria did not lock him away. Perhaps she understood too well that no wall, no guard, and no fortune had ever guaranteed safety. Other complications gathered. Gloria's old friendship with Truman Capote had curdled after his society writings exposed and wounded women who had once trusted him. In the world of La Côte Basque, Babe Paley, and the Swans, loyalty could be as delicate as a glass stem. Capote had known Gloria since youth, yet his later remarks and portrayals cut into the old trial, the old stutter, and the old shame. Another witness to her life had turned the witness stand into theatre. In the 1990s came financial and legal trouble. Gloria discovered that trusted professional figures, including a lawyer and a therapist, had swindled her out of millions. She won a judgment, but the money did not truly return. Then came tax liabilities of more than $3 million, a burden that forced sales of homes and possessions. The girl once called impossibly rich found herself again at the mercy of papers, lawyers, and numbers. Reports after her death would dispute the old idea that she had left a $200 million fortune. Estate values were far smaller, with real estate and probate figures placed under or around $1.5 million. Anderson Cooper received less than the legends assumed, while Stan Stokowski was linked to her Manhattan co-op. The public had believed in vaults. Gloria had lived through the bills. Still, she kept making. In 2004, she published It Seemed Important at the Time, a memoir of romance and memory. In 2009, well into old age, she published Obsession, an erotic novel that startled some readers and amused others. She wrote articles, memoirs, fiction, and poetry. She painted, she sold art. She remained romantic, curious, and unwilling to be embalmed by tragedy. The hollow crown had not saved her. Neither had the swan, the signature, or the famous surname. But she was still alive, and she was still working. In her final decades, Gloria Vanderbilt became less a socialite than a living archive of 20th century American glamour and pain. She had moved through the roaring 20s by birth, the Great Depression by scandal, wartime Hollywood by marriage, post-war music by Stokowski, New York cinema by Lumet, Southern tenderness by Wyatt Cooper, designer denim by Murjani, and cable news fame through Anderson. She continued to make art with a persistence that seemed almost devotional. In 2014, at 90, she exhibited new work in The Left Hand is the Dreamer at the first DIBS Gallery in New York. She embraced Instagram in her 90s, using it to show her work and reach younger admirers who knew her not from the courtroom, and perhaps not even from the genes, but from color, pattern, age, candor, and endurance. The late platform suited her strangely well. A public life, made of images and captions, finally controlled from her own hand. In 2016, she and Anderson Cooper published The Rainbow Comes and Goes and appeared together in the HBO documentary Nothing Left Unsaid, Gloria Vanderbilt and Anderson Cooper. The project turned mother and son into correspondents of memory. They spoke of love, grief, sex, family, money, Carter, and the strange privilege of surviving long enough to compare wounds without flinching. By then, Anderson had become one of America's most recognizable journalists. Christopher Stokowski had long lived at a distance from the public family story. Stan Stokowski remained part of the surviving circle. Carter's name was still spoken, not hidden. The family Gloria had built had never been simple. 4 sons, 4 marriages, 1 public childhood, 1 dead husband who had been her safest love, and 1 son whose death remained the central wound. She had also made a measure of peace with Gloria Morgan, not by pretending the childhood had been whole, but by seeing her mother as young, frightened, vain, ill-equipped, and trapped in her own way. The anger did not vanish by magic. It aged into something quieter. In 2019, at 95, Gloria was diagnosed with advanced stomach cancer. She chose the end quietly, at home in New York, close to family and memory. There was still laughter near the end, still art in the rooms, still the instinct to observe what was passing before her. Anderson said she had lived on her own terms and remained, to those who loved her, strangely young in spirit. That was not a denial of age. It was the peculiar youth of someone still interested in the next color, the next story, the next affection. Gloria Vanderbilt died on June 17, 2019 in New York City. She was 95 years old. The obituaries named her as heiress, artist, author, actress, socialite, designer, mother, and survivor. They also named the trial, the genes, the marriages, the fortune, Carter, and Anderson. Nearly every paragraph of those final notices had to choose which Gloria to explain first, because one life had contained too many public identities for a single headline. Near the end, there was no need to pretend the ledgers balanced. She had gained money and lost money. She had been adored and abandoned. She had made rooms of colour and stood in rooms of unbearable absence. She had written about romance in 2004 and desire in 2009. She had shown new paintings at 90 and spoken with Anderson in 2016, as if memory itself could be a final art form. The child who had been treated as a trust became an old woman surrounded not by certainty, but by work, memory, and the son who remained. The final inventory was not marble or denim. It was breath, then no breath. Gloria Vanderbilt's life began with a document and ended with a body at home in New York. Between those two facts lay almost a century of American spectacle: the courthouse, the hotel suite, the Long Island estate, the Hollywood marriage, the concert hall, the film director's table, the warm family rooms with Wyatt Cooper, the department store rack, the 14th Floor terrace, the auction listing, the hospital diagnosis. Few American women of her century were watched so young, sold so widely, and still able, at 90, to place new work on a gallery wall. It would be easy to make her a lesson, and easy lessons do not suit lives like hers. Wealth did not make her safe. Beauty did not keep her loved. Talent did not spare her grief. Nor did suffering make her pure. She could be theatrical, extravagant, hungry for attention, careless with money, and endlessly romantic. She could also be brave, imaginative, devoted, and astonishingly alive after losses that would have turned many people to stone. The facts refused to sit neatly. A trust child, an abused bride, a mother of 4 sons, a widow, a designer, a debtor, a novelist, a 90-year-old painter standing beside new work in New York. What remained most vividly was not the Vanderbilt inheritance, but her refusal to let inheritance be the whole of her. At 10, she was made to answer adults in a courtroom. At 17, she mistook a dangerous man for escape. At 21, she married a conductor more than 40 years her senior. At 52, she placed her signature on denim and watched strangers buy a softened version of a name that had once trapped her. At 64, she watched Carter disappear from the terrace and went on breathing after the impossible. Fellow travelers, we do not look at such a life because it is grand. We look because grandeur failed to protect it. The famous name worked like theatre lighting, bright enough for the audience, hot enough to burn the person beneath it. Gloria spent 95 years stepping in and out of that light, arranging colour against sorrow, conversation against silence, art against the old accusation that she was only an heiress. In the end, the poor little rich girl became an old woman who had outlived nearly every title placed upon her. Not untouched, not triumphant in any simple way, simply present, making, remembering, asking to be known beyond the headline. That request was modest, and still it took 95 years to make it heard. Somewhere in the story, the courtroom emptied. The jeans went out of fashion. The apartments changed hands. The swan became a logo in the archive. The old Vanderbilt fortune, already scattered before she was born, could not gather itself again around her. What remained was not a solved life, but a witnessed one. Paintings, books, sons, photographs, legal papers, fabric, labels, grief named aloud. The world had first watched her unwillingly in 1934. By the end, she had learned to decide what parts of herself she would show. And in that quiet, after all the noise, one could almost hear the fallen scepter touch the floor of a silent palace. If you found yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find yourself in the next one too. Subscribe to the Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.